Hello to anyone who is watching this, who is joining this discussion or this. I guess it's not a discussion if you're watching it at home, but following along with this discussion as we continue to make our way toward the end of Matthew's gospel. And so let us begin with prayer. Let us pray. Merciful God, your strength and courage pour forth to sustain the witness of your faithful people. Awaken in us the humility to serve wherever creation is broken and needy, that we may follow in the way of our brother Jesus, die as he did to all that separates us from you, and be raised as he was to new life. Amen.
Amen.
And Chuck and Jackie, I don't know that I said hello to you. Good morning.
Good morning to you.
Hello. So a couple of quick announcements. Next week, of course, in addition to being Valentine's Day, is Ash Wednesday. So there will not be Bible study next week because I will be all over the place doing Ashes to Go and Ashes at Brighton Gardens and Washington Episcopal School and at St. Dunstan's. So we won't meet next week, but we'll resume the following Wednesday. And if you didn't see the notice in the newsletter yesterday, Marietta's memorial service will be on May 29th. It's a Wednesday afternoon at St. Dunstan's. So for those who felt like they connected with Marietta, either through worship at St. Dunstan's or visiting Brighton Gardens or here in Bible study, you might want to join us for that. Her family is sort of all over the place, and so England understands about that. And so we wanted to wait until there was a time when everybody could convene, or everyone who's able to could convene in Bethesda. So that's that. And then I wanted to just to spend a couple of minutes showing some images. I found this wonderful online it's sort of an online exhibit. It's really a blog post, but curated by this woman, Victoria Emily Jones, who's local. She's in Baltimore. And she's been working on an online gallery. And this particular one is called Journey to the Cross. Artists visualize Christ's passion, and they're more contemporary pieces than some of the pieces of art that I've been sharing with you all over the past several weeks. I will send out the link to the whole article because I think it's interesting. But for now, I just thought I would share some images to prime the pump as we get back into our discussion of Matthew. And it'll also help England to know where we are in the story. So just a few things. And you'll see that these are multicultural images, which makes sense that they are 20th and 21st century images. This first one is from Congo, of the Last Supper. And as I show these, if anyone wants to comment or wants to pause to linger over anything, let me know. But otherwise, I'll just show these. And then this is the Garden of Gethsemane, Japanese. I can't get my head around what's what here. Does anyone have any thoughts about this one? I think these are sleeping disciples here, but I don't know. Mm-hmm. Here is the betrayal of Judas. This artist is Bulgarian, I believe. I find this one particularly touching. And it didn't, for whatever reason, it didn't download, but in the original, or in the, not the original, but in the full picture that you will see if you look at the link I send out, there is an image in the background of Judas hanging himself. But when I downloaded it, it just gave me this. Interesting. Oh, go ahead, Elin. Sorry.
Sorry, I think that's a better choice.
Yeah. Interesting. And I don't know what to make of this, that Judas is holding this branch with the roots here. And I don't know if that's, the root of the Jesse tree or what that is meant to be. So if anyone has any brilliant observations about that, I welcome that. But for some reason, this one really touches me. This one is the denial of Peter, called Man with Rooster. It's Filipino. And then you may know the work of Heichi, contemporary Chinese artist, Pilate washing his hands. And then this one, which is Croatian, oops, sorry. Ecce Homo, the Man of Sorrows. And of course, we'll be picking up the story with Pilate and then going forward into the crucifixion today. And maybe nothing more needs to be said about these, but again, I will send all of these out to you so you can study. All right. So I think that's everything. Okay. So last week, am I correct? See, without you here, Elin, I lose track of where we leave off. So it's really good you're back to keep me on track, if for no other reason. Did we leave off at Barabbas? Does that sound right? Yeah. Okay. So last week we talked about the suicide of Judas, which is only in Matthew's gospel, then Jesus before Pilate. And one thing I noticed in retrospect, I didn't pick up on it as we were talking last week, but in the scene between Pilate and Jesus, you see verse 14, Jesus gave him no answer, not even to a single charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed. And if you remember, that word amazed comes up over and over and over in Matthew's gospel. The disciples are always amazed by Jesus, even though, they've seen other things that he has done. Every time it's brand new, right? And they're always amazed anew. And so here we get this word amazed again. And I looked at the Greek and it's the same word that we've seen elsewhere. So do with that what you will. And then the question of whom shall I release for you? Either Barabbas or Jesus, who is called the Messiah. And just a note here, some texts don't say Jesus Barabbas, they just say Barabbas. It's interesting, Jesus Barabbas or Jesus who's called the Messiah, there's more parallelism there. So again, don't know if that hits anybody in a particular way. All right. So we left it off with the crowd shouting, "Let him be crucified." Did we talk about Pilate washing his hands yet or no? I don't think we did. No? Okay. All right. Would somebody like to read these two paragraphs? Pilate hands Jesus over to be crucified and the soldiers mock Jesus.
I could do that. So when Pilate saw that he was gaining nothing, but rather that a riot was beginning, he took water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See it yourselves." And all the people answered, "His blood be on us and on our children." Then he released for them Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, delivered him to be crucified. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the praetorium, and they gathered the whole battalion before him, and they stripped him and put a scarlet robe upon him, and plaiting a crown of thorns, they put it on his head, and put a reed in his right hand. And kneeling before him, they mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews." And they spat upon him and took the reed and struck him on the head. And when they had mocked him, they They stripped him of the robe and put on his own clothes on him and led him away to crucify him.
Thank you. Anything you want to focus on here? Again, these are scenes which are so familiar to us. Does anything jump out at you, perhaps in a new way? Or I don't know if Donna or Elin, if Amy Jill says anything that's helpful here. Where do you want to go?
I will point out just quickly that the washing of the hands, I'm innocent of his blood, let the blood be upon us and our children. That's just Matthew. That's not, doesn't appear in Luke or in Mark.
I think that's very helpful. Thanks, John. And the other thing that we talked about last week was Pilate's wife, Mrs. Pilate, and her lack of a better name, in her dream, right? Sort of her prophetic dream saying have nothing to do with him. Who else has a dream in Matthew's gospel? Do y'all remember? I don't know that we talked about this last time.
I don't know in Matthew, but it says the dream recollects Joseph in Amy Jill.
So yes, so Joseph, son of Jacob, but also Joseph, husband of Mary,
Oh,
temporal father of Jesus, because at the very beginning of Matthew's gospel, the angel of the Lord appears to to Joseph in a dream and tells him not to have Mary stoned, not to put her away, to stick with her, and explains who this baby is. So it's the Matthean parallel to Gabriel appearing to Mary in Luke's gospel. So Joseph has a dream at the beginning, and now Mrs. Pilate has a dream. And so the question of dreams comes up in Matthew more than the other gospels. Anything else from Amy Jill? Or
Yes, in this, in verse 27, something that shook me, that I didn't think a whole cohort around him. A cohort, according to Amy Jill, is about 600 men, and that puts a whole different mindset on me, in that I wouldn't have thought that they would have protected their bad behavior by having a whole 600 people around Jesus.
Thank you, Elin. That number strikes me too. That's a lot of people.
I think Pilate isn't going to go out, isn't going to move through Jerusalem without a crowd
Yeah, and that's
of protectors.
yeah, but that's the size of that crowd. That's
Yeah.
I've
Wow.
always thought of him having, his people around
Yeah.
him, but that's a big group. What were you going to say, Fred? Sorry.
No, I'm just saying, in that day and age with thousands of, when a riot could start that would engulf all of Jerusalem, 600 people is probably, there was a garrison already at the Praetorium,
Mm-hmm.
and then Pilate would have brought his bodyguard with him. I can see that number being reached.
Yeah.
Well, when I read this for the first time, it struck me that he'd been out talking to the people, talking to the Jews.
Mm-hmm.
Who do you want him to release this stuff? But now he takes Jesus inside the palace with his soldiers. I don't think there are any Jews or priests or anybody in there. It's just the soldiers having fun and mocking him in a probably typical Roman way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Being crucified was supposed to be humiliating.
Well, that's the word that I wanted to highlight. Exactly. It's that as we move through and just pull up this image again, this image of humiliation. It's this theme that comes up over and over and over again. So thanks, Fred, for saying that. Because let's kind of focus on that. How is Jesus being humiliated, and what is the point of that as we move through? What about, so John reminded us that Pilate washing his hands only appears in Matthew. What's that about? The washing of the hands. What does that bring up for you all?
Well, I can understand why if he did it, why he washed his hands, because he felt they were putting somebody to death who really didn't have any threat. He wasn't a threat to anybody. But what seems odd to me is verse 25. That's what struck me, the one that John said is only in Matthew. Why in the world would this crowd, it just seems so strange and out of character that a crowd would answer, his blood be on us and on our children, because people, I mean, don't usually bring down
Curse themselves.
possible curses on their children. It just why are they so eager as a group to, it almost sounds like maybe it didn't happen. It sounds strange.
What do you all think? I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's, I think, is a really problematic and
Well, Christianity is trying
Mm.
to fit into the Roman Empire. So, you know, excusing the Romans for the crucifixion, allows the early Christians not to be mad at Rome.
Do you think they do excuse the Romans? I never thought of it that way.
Pretty much. I mean, Matthew is, blaming the Jewish hierarchy, and remember, his theme is that the Jews, should move into monotheism 2.0. So the ones that don't and are left behind, are even more exposed.
Okay.
Just my take on it, but I can see politically it would be very advantageous to let the Romans off the hook if you're trying to get along with the Roman Empire.
I just want to make sure everybody saw, I'd flashed this up before. Other ancient authorities read this righteous blood or this righteous man's blood. So it's not just this man's blood, but emphasizing the righteousness of Jesus, the innocence of Jesus. Hush, Joey, hush. So okay. So
Does Pilate say that because of his wife's dream? I mean,
good question. What do you all think? Given that the dream only appears in Matthew, we wonder that leads me to a couple of questions. Is it that Matthew made it up as a literary device, or did it happen and he was privileged to some material that was circulating that Mark and Luke and John weren't, especially Mark and Luke? It could be either of those. So if we think about the dream and the fact that Matthew also has Joseph dreaming at the beginning, so somehow Matthew is, how do dreams function in stories?
there's some kind of a presage of things to happen.
Yeah. And the otherworldly, somehow oftentimes in dreams, a dream gives that forecast more authority, right? Because it's as though it's coming from a higher authority, a higher source. And certainly with Joseph, we get, we're told it's the angel of the Lord. Here we don't know where this dream is coming from Pilate's wife, but probably imagine that this is a warning that she's having. So okay, so that Pilate is being warned not to do this. Fred, what were you going to say? Sorry.
Oh, my comment would be, how did they know?
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's unlikely that there were any Christians privy to Pilate's relationship with his wife.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think this is just, I put this down as purely a literary device to once again, you know, excuse the Romans from any culpability.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if you don't, there's no reason for Pilate to say he's innocent without that dream. I don't think.
Mhm.
Pilate's never had. I'm not that familiar with the early Matthew, but I don't think he has any contact or anything or
Mm-hmm.
Jesus.
Pilate was historically, you know, just, he was a mid-level, you know, functionary trying to climb the ladder from his
Yeah,
relatively obscure position up.
right.
And at one point, as I remember reading, you know, they wanted to install a statue of Augustus in the temple, and the Jews had a massive passive resistance. They all just gathered in the courtyard and sat there, you know, so that they couldn't pass. And Pilate was ready to massacre the whole group of them until somebody pointed out that there wouldn't be anybody to harvest the crops, and that might make him look bad at tax time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
Practical.
it wasn't that he cared about the Jews. Now at the same time, you know, he knows the Jews are gunning for him
Mm-hmm.
and would like to, you know, string him up by his intestines from the nearest lamp pole.
Lovely.
So if he interrogated Jesus and found, and Jesus came across as a pacifist, you know, I'm not against Rome,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I want, you know, Pilate, every Jew that Jesus converts is a Jew who doesn't want to rebel against Rome. And that gives him a, you know, sort of a good reason not to want to punish Jesus. But then the power structure comes along and says, okay, if there's a riot, it's your fault for letting him go.
Well, that's the thing. It's that riot piece. And you know, when we think about the cohort of 600 men, right? So, you know, doing everything to maintain the Pax Romana, right? Because that's, we've talked about this so many times, that is the overarching desire, right? Peace at all cost, or if not peace.
Rome at all costs.
Yeah, exactly.
Romans weren't necessarily peaceful people.
No, but for Rome, not to have disruption, not to, you know, peace in the sense of, you know, and Pax Romana is a thing. So peace in the sense of no rioting, no war, obedience to the empire. So in that sense. So one thing, just to be clear, so Jesus isn't converting Jews, right? There's nothing to convert them to. So, but he is bringing people into this movement, this new way of understanding. And so, yeah, I mean, they could be very dangerous to Pilate. So he's really trying to separate
I don't
himself.
think they're dangerous to Pilate. They're dangerous to the temple authority.
But they're dangerous to Pilate if there's an uprising, right?
Yeah.
That's, you know,
But the Jesus is not going to lead an uprising. Jesus is
he's
a
not going to
peaceful.
lead an uprising. But if the Jews get mad on their own, right,
Well,
there's going to be one. So Jesus isn't instigating it. But
Jesus is
there's no
teaching, you know,
reason.
turn the other cheek and carry the Roman, you know,
I'm aware.
guy
I'm aware.
an extra mile. So
How-
Pilate probably likes what he hears.
Right. And why is he saying, I am innocent of this man's blood? Right. He is trying to separate himself, to distance himself as much as possible from this.
Well,
And
at least,
oh, go ahead, John.
I'm going to say at least, and again, this is out of the gospel parallels. In Matthew, he's doing that.
Well, and that's
Mark-
what we're doing, is we're focusing on Matthew. How does Matthew tell the story? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But Mark is the earliest, and Mark makes it more, they come to Pilate and, you know, he says, what do you want me to do with this guy who you call King of the Jews? And people say, crucify him. And then Pilate says, well, what's he done? And the crowd says, crucify him. And Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, turns him over. So it's more you know, there's not a whole lot of washing of hands, but he's
Yep.
just satisfying the crowd.
Yep.
Luke picks up the same concept that appears in Matthew of, I looked at this guy. There's nothing he's done that deserves death. I'm just going to let him go. But then the people say, crucify him, and they prevail.
Exactly. Exactly. So back to Donna's question, why would so following on that, why would Matthew have the people as a whole shout, his blood be on us and on our children? What's that about?
It lets the Romans off the hook.
Yeah, but did they
And
really want it?
it leaves the Jews, you know, who do not follow along into Christianity.
There is no
leaves-
Christianity at this point. That's what we need to
Well, but
remember.
there's the monotheism 2.0.
Right. There is the way of Jesus. There are Jewish Christians in the sense, or Christian Jews, I should say, followers of Jesus who are still Jews, but there isn't a monolithic Christianity at this point.
No.
I just want to make sure people are clear about that. That's the only reason I interject that. So, okay. So why else, if we think, there's a very practical element to this. Theologically, if we're going to zoom out and take a bigger, broader view, kind of the way the Gospel of John does, what would be the point of Matthew explicitly having the people say, his blood be on us and on our children?
Yeah, this is what I'm having.
Well, I think it's just to show they're in a frenzy. They're not really thinking right.
That mob mentality, right?
Yeah, right, but beyond mob mentality, it's almost like people in a cult. They do things that don't make any sense. These people are not making any sense at this point. They're almost, I don't know if possessed is going too far, but they're not thinking.
Excellent. And let's take that a little bit further. So these are the same people who did what when Jesus entered Jerusalem?
Put the palms down on the ground.
Hosanna in the highest, hail King of the Jews. And that wasn't ironic at that point. In a minute, we're going to hear the soldiers picking that up ironically and mockingly and in a humiliating tone, as we were saying. But it's the same group of people who turn on him. And so there is this mass betrayal by his own people. And theologically, we've seen this case building. We had Judas betraying Jesus. Matthew is really good at painting Peter as sort of a lesser Judas. There are definitely some analogs, some parallels between Peter and Judas, the way Matthew tells the story. And so now the people as a whole are doing it. So everybody is turning against the one whom they were praising and bowing down before and strewing the palm branches. And so there's something that always convicts me. I'll speak just from an eye perspective, the human ability to turn like that. And as Louise says, they're in a frenzy. It's not just oh yeah, why don't you crucify them? I mean, they're out of their minds, right?
Well, when Jesus entered the city, they expected him to perform as the Messiah.
Well,
by their definition, and he has failed. And in failure, he becomes, a blasphemer.
Okay. But that's my point, Fred, is that's what we humans do, right? When people don't live up to our expectations, when we put them high on a pedestal and they fall off because P.S. they're human, or whatever it is, we humans have this capacity to turn. Not always, not everyone, but there is, we do this, right? And so what I'm saying is, I hope that as we read through this, we each can see ourselves in the story and just wonder, what would I do were I there? Because that's really the invitation that we're being given is, how would I behave? Would I have recognized Jesus not having the perspective that we have right now, having read the whole story, knowing, having read the last page, knowing how it ends, at least for now, they don't have that. And
They don't have the perspective of Jesus as, I mean, all they know is here is somebody who's coming to be the Messiah.
But remember, some of
And
these
they haven't
people,
redefined Messiah.
but remember, some of these people are his closest followers. So even the, and that's my point, is that even those who do have that perspective turn. So going back to Donna's, question, who does this? Who curses themselves and especially their children? Who takes that on? I'm glad that we pause and say, this is extraordinary. This is disturbing. And of course, we talked last time about how that line gets appropriated, misappropriated and is turned against the Jews. And certainly in the 20th century, this language and the language in John's gospel about the Jews is really problematic. And so that's why we have to really pause and unpack this and say, okay, does this mean that Jewish people for all eternity from this point on are cursed and damned because of the crucifixion of Jesus? I don't buy that.
I have a question for you, Patty. Are you saying or implying that that the disciples were in this crowd?
Well, they're there, aren't they?
They are there, but I always thought they were standing like bystanders watching.
Being a low
But
profile.
They may be, but they're certainly not speaking up, as a counterpoint to these voices. And so, at least passively, they're not helping Jesus's case. I'm not sure I would want them on my team if I were really up against it, because they're not much use. That's really what I'm saying, is whether they're screaming crucify him or not. I'm glad you asked me to clarify this. And maybe some are, but whether they are or they aren't, they're not saying, wait a minute, stop. And they're terrified. We know that. They're human. Again, this is, this is shining a spotlight on human nature, I think. Someone was going to say something as I was rattling on.
Well, I was going to say something kind of silly, really, but
I doubt
I'm sure all of us have seen films where this subject is treated. And I know that the four gospels treated somewhat differently, so there can't be one unified view. But the treatments I've seen, Pilate is depicted as somebody who is afraid that he's impressed with Jesus. And when he does say that he's amazed that Jesus stood mute. Now that surprises me, because I think back in those days, I mean, wouldn't people be mute? Is he the first person ever to not speak in his own defense? But that there was this other way of looking at Pilate as, my wife warned me of this, and this is scary, and maybe there's something in this guy. I'm not his follower. I don't know what he says, but it scares me. So I think I'll hedge my bets and wash my hands of this and just go away so I don't have to watch it.
I don't think that's silly at all, Donna. And I think that's got to be part of it, right? And it's certainly hinted at. And again, not one of us is inside the mind of Pilate, nor were the gospelers. But the way Matthew presents this, that amazement. What's that amazement about? Again, that's a echo back to the disciples who are amazed, and they've been walking with Jesus and they've seen him do these miraculous things, and they're astonished, they're amazed. That word comes up over and over and over again. And so Matthew puts that same response on Pilate, that he too is amazed. So I don't think that's silly at all. I think it's there in the text for sure.
Why didn't Jesus do something, say something?
Question. Very good question. What do y'all think? We'll go back to that. Why didn't Jesus say anything? The only thing he says is when Pilate asks, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus says, "You say so." But then he's mute. What do y'all think?
I think that Jesus was certainly a very extremely clever person and had an amazing verbal facility, and he may have been able to save his hide by some clever retort, but he did choose not to. I guess that's what the question is.
I'm glad you said that about him being so clever, because we see that with all the parables, right? And I know we could say, well, that's the gospel or telling the story, but so many of the parallels appear in multiple places, which gives us a sense that that's how Jesus told them. And they're always so clever and they always make you think. So clearly he's quick on his feet, right? And could, as you say something.
And Pilate would have been amazed, because most people facing crucifixion, if they had nothing else, they would probably just start babbling the way panicked people do, just to say something to get out of it.
Save their own hide, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that would amaze me, that someone could face this and just say nothing, particularly when he had been, from the time he entered Jerusalem, he had sort of taken on the mantle of being the Messiah. He wasn't he wasn't telling people don't say anything, or he wasn't reluctant to assume that.
Well, his entry into Jerusalem was such a visible and public.
Showy.
Yeah. Joey. Yeah. Here comes Ray. Yeah.
So, I mean, there are two things. One, he should have, I mean, this could have been a teaching moment for Pilate.
Jesus teaching Pilate, or Pilate teaching Jesus?
Well, Jesus teaching, getting a broad, he has a big audience here of powerful people, and he could say, we have no quarrel with Rome. My kingdom is not of this earth.
Which he does in John's gospel, not now.
Yeah. And, we are not, we're not your enemies. And instead he, says nothing.
Hey, Ray.
Good morning, folks.
I mean, some of it in response to that is that if we go back to Gethsemane, Jesus has prayed, God, please take this from me.
Yeah.
Whatever, twice he does that. And then the third time he says, my Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, thy will be done. So there's sort of, at that point, is an acceptance that what is going to happen at that point.
Well, then you're putting on God the the mandate that Jesus be sacrificed, which Patty and I have already disagreed with.
Well, but I still don't think that necessarily puts it on God, because God's not asking that Jesus be sacrificed. God, if anything, may be allowing people to be people and do what they're going to do and betray Jesus, so as to, play this out. But, that's different.
If my kids came to me with that excuse when they were young, it wouldn't have played.
Well,
you're not
my
God.
point is, do we ever see any place where we get the sense that God is demanding that Jesus be sacrificed to appease God? That just doesn't ring true for me at all. And I know it doesn't for you either, Fred.
Yeah, but I mean, which
is why I was talking about this, theologically, having the people turn on Jesus. It's really showing sinful human nature of what we humans are capable, that we could do this, and so his blood be on us and on our children. If depending on how literally we take that, we could say that we're the descendants as well, right? Generations to come, that there's something about human nature that does this. And as you've heard me say before, I argue that in our sinful human nature, certainly in this context, it was sort of inevitable that Jesus would run afoul, that he would be executed, because his gospel, his preaching about love and forgiveness and embracing and loving and supporting your enemy, it's too much. It just cannot be, it can't be allowed to flourish at this point. So that's my thought on that. So Ray, you'll see we haven't made a huge amount of progress, but we've had a really good conversation.
Well, as always.
Exactly. Well, let's talk a little bit. So we were talking about the humiliation of Jesus, and that's really, Matthew goes to great lengths to show Jesus being humiliated. And so we were talking about Jesus and Pilate a lot, but then Chuck also read for us this paragraph about the soldiers mocking Jesus. And we talked about the whole cohort was about 600 men. So there's this big crowd here. They strip Jesus, they put a scarlet robe on him, crown of thorns, the reed in his right hand, hail King of the Jews. So what's happening in this scene? Why is any of this necessary? Either at the literal level or the narrative level, the thematic, theological level. Why is it necessary that the soldiers mock him?
I don't think it's necessary, but I think that's another human nature. I think we had one of the articles this morning in the Post, the Israeli film of Israeli soldiers mocking the Palestinian captives that they had. It's part of the humiliation. It's part of something people do to a weakened party. The Romans here making fun of the guy who thinks he's the king of the Jews. I mean, as far as they know, he has challenged Rome, or he has challenged, upset the Sanhedrin, whatever. They don't care. He's just he's a weak guy, and they're going to make it worse.
So it's about power,
bullying,
distancing yourself from him because his his future is not looking bright.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could be you.
Yeah, and this proves that it can't be me because I'm not like him. Also, it's a contrast to his eventual rising up in glory. So they push him down as far as they can so that his emergence will be that much more impressive.
And then we also have this juxtaposition, or not even juxtaposition, but back to back. We have the Jewish crowd saying his blood be on us. So they are pushing him toward crucifixion. And then the Roman soldiers are mocking him. So you've got, again, both entities turning on him. If you just, Donna will understand this. As an English teacher, I often will read these stories in the Gospels or in any part of the Bible and just think about narratively, why is that happening? And so here we have both groups turning on him and really doing their damnedest to humiliate him. Ray, one of the images I showed before, I just find this so powerful. It's a contemporary Croatian artist.
Wow.
Ecce Homo, the man of sorrow, behold the man. And you just see, he's beaten up. I find it haunting as we get to this point.
Bruised
Okay.
eye, particularly.
Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah. And what gets me, yes, the bruised eye that's, swollen shut, but the other one's open. And looking, oops, sorry, and looking at the viewer, which, yeah, I find just powerful. Well, should we read about the crucifixion? And would somebody like to do this, these two paragraphs through verse 44?
Oh, sure.
Thanks,
32 to
Fred.
44.
Yes, please.
As they were going out, they met a man from Cyrene named Simon, and they forced him to carry the cross. They came to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. There they offered Jesus wine to drink mixed with gall, but after tasting it, he refused to drink it. When they had crucified him, they divided up his clothes by casting lots, and sitting down, they kept watch over him there. Above his head they placed the written charge against him: "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." 2 rebels were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, "You who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. Come down from the cross if you are the Son of God." In the same way, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders mocked him. "He saved others," they said, "but he can't save himself. He's the King of Israel? Let him come down now from the cross, and we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God rescue him now if he wants him, for he said, 'I am the Son of God.'" In the same way, the rebels who were crucified with him also heaped insults on him.
Thank you, Fred. What strikes you all?
I've always wondered what gall was. Was that to make the wine unpalatable, or was there some
But
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, what strikes me is this takes me back to Jesus in the desert with Satan up on the big rock saying, "Throw yourself down, they'll pick you up." I mean, it has the same echoes of prove it to the people, they'll follow you anywhere.
Exactly. Beautiful.
Of course, the priest would have been even more unhappy had he proved it.
It amazes me that the rebels or bandits in my Bible, that they got in on the taunting too. And you think, well, they're all in the same boat.
Nothing else to do up there. It's human nature, regardless of how bad things are, to try and find somebody you can look down on.
And again, absolutely. And so if you think about this progression in the story, the Jews let this man's blood be on us and our children. The soldiers mock and humiliate him. And even these 2 bandits, these rebels, they turn on him too. So it's just like this descent, right? And so everybody is turned against him, which I think from the point of the gospel is that's the point. Yeah.
Except in Luke, where there's the good
exactly
Chris guy and the bad one, and the one who's going to go to heaven and the one who isn't. So I guess Luke wanted to
stress forgiveness and the ability, regardless of your circumstance, to find salvation. Matthew is focusing on how far down he was pressed to make his eventual outcome that much more dramatic.
Well, yes, and I think it's also a large-scale indictment of human nature that I think both of those are true. One thing, verse 37, over his head, they put the charge against him, which read, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Gospel Parallels doesn't include John, does it, John?
It has cross references to John where appropriate.
While I'm talking, I'll try to look it up. In John's Gospel, Pilate says, have them cross that out. Oh, here it is. I've turned right to it. That's interesting. The chief priests of the Jews said to Pilate, "Do not write the King of the Jews." But this man said, I am the King of the Jews. Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." So John, fleshes that out more. But Matthew is just, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Which is, again, think about what was the purpose of crucifixion? I mean, obviously, it's execution, it's to put someone to death. But socially, what's the purpose of crucifixion?
Humiliation,
Humiliation.
public,
Yeah.
public warning.
Yeah, exactly. It's a deterrent. And so remember that people were crucified at the outskirts of the city so that anyone approaching Jerusalem, going up to Jerusalem, would see the crosses. So it's a big warning sign. And so to put that over his head, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." This is what will happen to you too if you are a pretender in this way. If you try to elevate
Challenge Rome.
yourself and challenge Rome, and challenge the Jews, right? And that's why in John's Gospel, the chief priest of just say he said that, but Pilate says, "What I've written, I've written."
Well, Pilate is maybe losing a little patience with him. He's crucifying this guy because they threatened him, and now they're trying to wiggle their way back out of it.
Yeah, they're micromanaging how he's handling this. It's like, yeah. So John points out the echoes of Jesus in the wilderness with Satan, mocking him. He saved others, he can't save himself, come down off the cross. And once again, he doesn't say anything. He doesn't do it. Anything else here that maybe strikes you in a new way, or that you want a word that you want to look at more closely? I want to look at the word "deliver" in verse 43. Just see what the Greek is for that. Come on.
Rescue.
Come on. Ah.
I mean, my text says, "Let God rescue him."
Mm-hmm. That's why I'm interested in what the Greek says. Because deliver sounds kind of like Exodus or Passover language. Okay, to draw to oneself, to rescue, to deliver. Rumamai, okay.
All to oneself somehow looks different to rescue, to deliver.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
Deliver us from evil.
Mm-hmm. 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 Anything else? Should we pause here and, oh, go ahead, Ray.
Just going to say there in the paragraph there is a distinction between what pissed off the Romans, which was the King of the Jews language, and the theology objections of the priests below. There is a dichotomy there. I don't think the priest really cared if he thought he was the King of the Jews.
Yeah, the priest wouldn't be impressed by kingship, right?
Or
But
even if they were, I mean, you know, they've got kings. They know about kings.
but
But
they,
that-
yeah, but they wouldn't, I guess what I'm
Okay.
saying is they wouldn't be threatened by the kingship piece.
Mhm.
And remember, it's also in Matthew's gospel that we get the Epiphany story. Think way back, Matthew 3, when Herod is so threatened by this baby and he wants the three magi to come back and report to him. So Matthew sets this up. This whole story from the beginning is about this baby who's, you know, potentially a pretender to the throne, blah, blah, blah. And so it's no wonder that we get this climactic moment where Rome says, no, we're just gonna finally, once and for all, we're gonna get rid of this problem. But you're right, the Jews wouldn't care about the kingship piece because that's not a threat to them. But the heresy, you know, challenging Jewish teaching, that matters to them.
Interestingly, in John, and this is one that is here, is that Pilate said to them, the chief priests and scribes, "Shall I crucify your king?" According to John, the chief priest answers, "We have no king but Caesar."
Caesar, exactly.
So
Pat,
they know where how
They
to
know where their
protect
bread is
themselves.
buttered.
Exactly. Louise, what were you going to say?
well, I was going to say when we were talking about deliver, that makes me think of the Lord's Prayer, deliver us from evil, which it's, when I looked it up, it apparently was transcribed by Matthew.
Hmm.
Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Deliver us from evil.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that's a very powerful word.
I
Very
think
powerful word. Mhm.
agreed.
Mhm.
And the whole concept of deliverance, you know, that is sort of baked into the Jewish DNA when you think about the Exodus story, being delivered from slavery. So that whole idea. And it's not just rescued, almost sounds like, this is the way I hear these words differently. Rescued almost sounds like a deus ex machina, you know, God comes down, plucks you off the cross, boom, you're out of there. But deliver is, I'll just say, as someone who's delivered 3 babies, it takes a while. It's more of a process. And so, at least in English, I don't know about the subtleties of the Greek, but at least in English, I hear those things differently.
Yeah.
Well, I think we should wait to talk about the death of Jesus until the 21st. So, Ray, we're not meeting next Wednesday because it's Ash Wednesday, and I'll be running around Bethesda giving ashes. But so we'll pick up on the 21st with the death of Jesus.
Perfect.
And we'll probably next week or in 2 weeks finish 27. And then we will have chapter 28, which is the post-resurrection appearances, etc. So again, we've really got to start thinking about what comes next. So maybe on the 21st, we can carve out some time to make a decision. We've talked about a few things. All right. Thank you all. I will send out that link with those images if you want to spend some time with them, especially that one of Ecce Homo, which I just, again, as Fred said, the one bruised and closed eyes, just it's really powerful. All right, dear ones, I will see some of you this weekend. Thank you all for a wonderful conversation and welcome home, Elin. We're so glad you're back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to be
Bye,
back.
everyone.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.